Tutorials in video games, a necessary process how to teach the player how to play the game, or in some cases, how to play games period, and some go as far as to teach how to even use the controller that they're using to play the game. Something that people, or online anyway, tend to complain about, but is a necessary thing considering the fact that 1, games can play very differently, and 2, every game in the world is someone's first game out there. No matter what era, there could be someone whose first game could be anything out there. I would just look somewhere in my room and there, right there, .GU Volume 1 Rebirth, that could be someone's first game. So tutorials are a very necessary precaution. The issue becomes, well, not the fact of tutorials existing, is that tutorials that can be handled, because they can be done either very well, very poorly, or done in a way where some people don't even realize they're being tutorialized, which is the more interesting aspect when people don't even know they are getting a tutorial in some way, shape, or form, even though the game is basically teaching them how to do certain aspects of the game. The tutorial that comes to my mind with the concept is actually from Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon, the spin-off title, simply because this game has a more comedic tone and everything how it goes for. But also the fact the tutorial also is both a joke on tutorials and being annoyed with them, but at the same time also plays it straight since the player has to do the tutorial even if the character in question is constantly frustrated. So if you don't like it, you're on board with the character, if it's not to do it, but if you don't play the game before, then you are still learning with it and might be left with the character being frustrated at the fact that they have to go through this process that to them, they already know, but for someone else, they don't know yet.
This is not cool.
Moving allows you to go in many exciting directions.
Why?
Running is like walking, only faster.
Fuck.
Are these tutorials getting in the way of your mayhem?
One tutorial I've seen people complain about is the tutorial for Mega Man Legends in the first section. So basically people complain about the fact that Roll is constantly talking to Mega Man throughout the entire process, even though it's not about the entire game. But the fact that Roll is there to help teach you what's going on, since the player's being dumped into this scenario midway through. But people don't like it because of the fact that people don't like the aspect of having someone talking in your ear telling you to do something, but also the fact that the tutorial, while it does give you some leeway to make mistakes, also at points take away control. Like one aspect where she tells Mega Man, don't move, but the player is forced not to move. That's the choice the player actually made, so in that case, the player can't make the mistake, but there are still traps in the locale that can teach you certain things, like hit this button, oh, now you're trying to little field with enemies and stuff like that, where you do have stuff to experiment, but it's the fact of having a voice, having essentially the developers talking to you and telling you what you're supposed to do. That is what annoys people. I remember back in the day when I was in college, how Professor said when a mate comes to being a good tutorial is the fact that the developers can't be there in the room with the player, so you have to do a good job at teaching the player. Within this case, them basically having Roll be the voice of the developers, telling the player what to do in certain aspects in order to get things across, which is generally what I see complaints for a lot of games people have, when it feels like a certain character has become a mouthpiece for a developer in order to explain certain things. Metal Gear Solid, for example, used the codec system for so many things, but one of the things also use the codec system for is to teach the players certain mechanics, what the characters talk about bit by bit. But strangely, I don't really see people complain that much about it. It was the fact that you have a game, like Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater, that the manual that came with the game was also a mini comic adventure where they also taught you not only aspect of the controls how to play the game, they also taught you neat tricks in the game, like the fact that your stamina will recover over time if you just stop playing the game for a bit and stuff like that, and did it in this whole entire little narrative adventure in the manual. But since we're in a day and age where manuals are either gone digital or are non-existent, developers need to find other ways in order to teach the player how to play the game, and one of the more intrusive ways would be immediately forcing the player off the bat into a tutorial scenario. Resident Evil The Mercenaries 3D is the first time in I don't even know how long that a game actually explained to the player that a red barrel means explosive, and that's a thing. I can't remember the last time a game has ever mentioned that detail, because one of those things are just taken for granted that people assume red barrel equals explosion. And it's one of those things that I know developers struggle with, where I believe was, can't remember where, but developers mentioned, oh, it made the barrel a different color, then playtesters won't know to shoot it. And it's like, here's a game, I can tell the player, if you see this thing, shoot at it, it's good. And it's just baffling that other games don't do that, just kind of assume the player already knows it. Granted, making an entire tutorial dedicated for it is a bit much, but it's one of those things that people just take for granted, especially developers, and act as though they don't need to teach to the player. And this is the first game I've seen in I don't know how many years to actively know red barrel, shoot it, and it blows up.
Ready your weapon. As you can see, those red drums are highly explosive. Make sure you don't become part of the collateral damage. Alright, soldier. Follow the markers on the map and destroy all the red drums. Reload with your weapon in the ready position.
Street Fighter 6, upon boot up, tries to railroad the player into doing certain things. So you got custom avatar for the online mode, stuff like that. Take you around to certain modes, but when I start the game, I just want to go to arcade mode so I can start getting a feel for the characters on the roster, but the game was being designed for a more casual person in mind. That being me. Ironically, me, the casual person, was getting annoyed that the game is like, okay, now go to this online mode, little lobby, okay, make a little avatar, okay, maybe a bit of world tour, like, I just want to go to arcade mode, man, what the hell? And it's like, it was designed for the casual in mind. It was designed for someone like me who's casual into fighting games, into trying to ease them in, but instead it just more annoyed me that I couldn't just go into the mode I wanted to play immediately. And yes, the tutorial mode, and I did do the tutorial mode because, hey, refresh learning more stuff about the game works, I will do, but at the same time, it was like, don't put a gun to my head, because some games do give you the option of you want a tutorial or not, and many games will just go, nah, screw you, you have to do the tutorial whether you want to or not. Resident Evil 7's prologue is one massive tutorial, but done in a way to make it feel more natural. Whether it be the stuff, they show you certain things such as, hey, these yellow tape stuff that were set up by one of Baker's, it's to interact with when it progress, or hey, here's how you come back, here's how you block, and stuff like that in this one-turn prologue scenario that is a praised immersive experience when it comes to a prologue. But when you realize it's one giant tutorial that you can't skip on repeat playthroughs, it goes from a cool experience to now something actually annoying. Because now you realize you can't avoid it, so now this thing that was something cool is now something that is now a one big tutorial that you already know, and you can't skip. There is certain parts of it that you can go a bit faster on, but the majority of it, you can't. The Persona franchise will generally put the player into an early fight in order to try and get them with pretty much control. Persona 1, 2, and Senso to a Punishment will generally have, I believe, a demon try to tutorialize the player on certain aspects of the play in order to pretty much tell them, okay, so you do things as if you want the demon's help. If you don't, they tell the demon, no thanks, I'm good. And that's a very nice demon, how kind of you. Persona 3, 4, and 5 go for a different idea, where they instead give the player free realm in a fight, and then later tell the player to play the game. Like Persona 3 has this one-turn early fight scenario where there's no tutorial whatsoever, just let you go, but then later they have one of the characters go, okay, this is how to play the game. You just tell me to do the game already. It's not that complicated, but okay. But then Persona 4 as well. You have this one little fight in this little dream sequence that, while it's not a real fight, is a case of you being able to mess with controls, and then later you have a character telling you he's gonna play the game properly. Persona 5 also gives you a fight early on, and then has to painstakingly explain every single mechanic of the freaking game slowly for some reason. And I said I emphasize that because Persona 3 and 4 had like maybe a couple tutorials. Persona 5 makes every tutorial to its own separate fight to explain it. And speaking of Persona 5, there actually was a change made to it when they re-released the game as the Royal version, where here's a snippet of the first Awakening fight with Joker in Persona 5.
Detest the enemies before you. Change that animosity into power and unleash it!
Persona!
Go down! Swing your blade! This power of mine is yours! Kill them however you want. Run wild to your heart's content! Come! There!
And now here's the differences when you play the game in the Royal version.
This power of mine is yours! Kill them however you want. Run wild to your heart's content!
Persona! Persona!
You see how the Royal version got to the point way faster and gives you more free control, while the original version explained each mechanic of combat one by one. That was developers learning they could speed up the process, and that was a good idea for re-release. The problem then becomes when you introduce a new mechanic for Royal, and then need to introduce that, basically taking the time they saved and putting it back in elsewhere, where I need to teach you about the fact that guns always reload every fight, and they, rather than just having Morgana say, there's a thing that happens, they instead have to show you it, thus defeating the point of them cutting down on the fat early on.
How about that? Surprise? There are plenty of instances where rapid fire is going to be more useful than swinging your nut. Of course, you can run out of ammo, but using it all up does more good than letting it collect dust. Let's get them! Our ammo's replenished. Go on, dump it into the enemy.
While many people rightfully bash Xenoblade Chronicles 2 tutorial, I'm not going to. Xenoblade 2, you're off the hook. Go off, have fun. Xenoblade Chronicles 3, however, get your ass over here, because this one has the opposite problem. Xenoblade 2 and Xenoblade X's problem, for that matter, is the fact that they poorly explain things to the player, with Xenoblade X giving you essentially a giant freaking book to study on how to play the game, and Xenoblade 2 just not explaining things properly. Xenoblade 3 is the one I have a gripe with, because this is where they can learn from the problems, and instead they go the opposite direction. They instead railroad the player very hard early on, and try to beat the player over the head every aspect of the combat system and everything. Even to the point where early on, where you're playing as the first three characters you play as, they have them verbally say out loud the main parts of their freaking combo in order to get it into your head. They have the characters constantly say,
Go for it, Noah! Break the enemy with a sword strike! Topple!
Daze!
Break!
Power ring!
Arrow burst!
over and over to have the player understand this fundamental mechanic, but it becomes way too of a case of go after yourself. Now you're doing it because you feel like the player was the problem with the tutorial in the last game at the fact that you poorly explain things. Or the fact that it gives you an entire chapter or so where they want to explain the ability of the class system and be able to swap them. but rather than giving you free control after explaining it, like something like Final Fantasy V, where they give you free control after explaining the mechanic, they instead lock the player into the other class for the whole duration of the segment, so that way the player can fully understand it, because just showing it isn't enough for the developers, I guess. And just stuff like that, where it becomes way too hand-holdy and way too the developers don't trust the player, where they went the complete opposite direction, which is why I don't understand how Xenoblade 3's tutorial system doesn't get flack when Xenoblade 2 and X does. It's just one of those ironic things where they go the opposite problem, where now you're pretty much going guns to the player's head, do exactly as we say. Also, the irony also being that there's one segment that they actually don't explain fully, leading some people to do the wrong thing or mistake, because this game's tutorial is so strict at the moment they don't mention one thing, people think they couldn't do it. As doing a chain attack system, where you choose to order the character of who will go first in a chain attack. The irony comes being the fact that the tutorial doesn't tell the player they can just move left and right to switch which character goes, and I've seen many people make the mistake thinking they have to use the character who's in front of the row for a chain attack, not the fact that they actually have control over the chain attack mechanic. It is the biggest irony that they still screwed something up because they didn't explicitly say it in the tutorial that is constantly railroading the player. No. We're bringing back Xenoblade 3 discussion. Hold on a second. Because having to re-go through a tutorial made me realize how much worse it actually was. At the fact they had to slowly and painfully go through the shops and menus bit by bit with the arrow directly pointing exactly what it wanted to do. And then in some cases, need to then adjust things per character, like the boss XP system, and it won't let you go to the screen until great. Now do it for the next person, now do it for the next person, now do it for the next person kind of thing that just annoyed the hell out of me. Or, in order to explain how a side quest functions, they make you do one. And it's one of those cases where, as a side quest, it's not a side quest anymore, it's a mandatory quest at that point. And this just tutorial system bugs the hell out of me because you can't skip any of it, which would be fine if you could skip it. Once again, feels like Monolith Soft are basically taking the idea that the player was the problem with Xenoblade 2 tutorial, which didn't explain much, so here they want you to go through every single task painstakingly, even doing things that don't really make much sense, like giving Noah an accessory that increases HP. But at this point in the game, Noah's only an attacker class, so you wouldn't want to give that to Lance, who's a tank who needs HP, since he's going to be taking all the hits in a fight, but instead they make you do the less smart idea of getting into a different character, solely because that's the only character they give you control of at the time. Or how they wait until you're playing as Mio, who's a tank role, in order to explain the aggro system and how enemies target the person dealing the most damage or who has aggro skills or to get their attention. But they explain this after several hours of gameplay, which in this case, you probably would have already dealt with the issue of dealing too much damage as Noah as an attacker, gaining aggro and taking damage that should have been avoidable if you knew to let the tank take the aggro. So this tutorial comes later than it should, actually, and it's just this tutorial annoys me because you have to do it and it takes so long because every aspect of the tutorial is explained in universe. The characters are talking about everything going on in the concepts, which is a neat detail. But you don't have to make an overly long hand-holding tutorial. Like I said, for the chain attack thing, the irony is because the moment they don't explicitly say something that you can change which character goes first in the chain attack order, people didn't know that they could do that and thought they were stuck with the person all the way on the left who was first. It's the biggest irony that the one thing they felt they didn't need to explain ended up needing mentioning to some people because you're so hand-holdy that everything else gets explained in the most smallest detail way that the one time you don't say something, people don't think you can do it. it's just hilarious irony. I don't like Xenoblade 3's tutorial system. I'm surprised this game's tutorial doesn't get as much flack, if not more, than Xenoblade 2 tutorial. You also have some games that do offer tutorial for certain mechanics and just make the tutorial optional, such as Vesperia, where the game tutorial will try to play the game just fine. The issue then becomes the fact that there are certain mechanics that are instead told to you through this extra guidebook you have to go out of your way in the menu in order to read up on, including the mechanic manual cancelling, which is a very good mechanic for the player to know when it comes to the combat of Vesperia, and it actually alleviates a lot of complaints people have with Vesperia's combat. The problem is the fact that it's not told to the player in the tutorial, but instead told to them on the side. And so it's one of those things where technically the game has the information there for the player to view, the fact that a lot of players just don't go into those little guidebooks in order to actually read up upon it. So those cases where the game does teach you, is just not the main tutorial to teach you, since technically you don't need to know the mechanics to play the game, but it's a very helpful thing if you did know. Two games I've seen praised for a tutorial is Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild Tears of the Kingdom, because those games start with essentially a giant 3-hour tutorial area that you aren't able to leave until you essentially have grasped the base of the game by putting each game's mechanic in an environment so you can see how it works. The reason I don't consider these particularly great tutorials is because, one, you see how each mechanic works separately, not together at all, and two, about the fact that the starting areas are there to teach you certain things, there are still other mechanics and stuff that the game still has tutorials for after you leave, but now that you're in the big open world nature, you can just flat out miss it entirely. In fact, in Tears of the Kingdom, there was an entire ability of the Ultra Hand I did not have because I just never went to the location where I was supposed to be at and went everywhere but there. But apparently, people made it seem as if I was the fool for not knowing to go to that specific location for tutorial on a new ability. It's like, why would I go in that particular location? Nothing drew a point into it. It's gonna be so important, it should have been part of my 3-hour tutorial segment now, shouldn't it? Or how also in Tears of the Kingdom, you need to talk to a certain NPC in order to increase the battery life of your constructs. Something that many other people didn't know how to do. It's like I questioned other people had more battery, but just kept thinking I'll get it later, only to find out I never did, and not after I beat the game, did I finally have someone tell me where the NPC in question was, and how they were baffled people were playing the game with the minimum battery in the game, because, well, the NPC isn't exactly an obvious standpoint. If you want this to be your main mechanic and thing tutorial as a player, you should have put that thing in the tutorial section and not in the open world where the player can go anywhere and ignore anything. You know, they're gonna have tutorial in Breath of the Wild Tears of the Kingdom. The tutorial should be in the tutorial section and not in the open world. Final Fantasy VIII is a game I've seen whose tutorial gets complaints about for either not taking enough information to the player or finding the player too much information, to which I disagree, because Final Fantasy VIII not only has a computer terminal in the bottom garden free-to-play tutorial, it then also has the mandatory one with Quistis telling information right before you need to then go into combat in order to go fight Ifrit. So the game at multiple points already early off the bat gives you important information. Then, when it's information that requires certain bosses that are like, hey, you need to junction certain elements to your weapon, then you can pretty much have the weapon change to that to make the boss easier. There are points where the characters will remind the player, hey, make sure to read your junction elements to your weapon before you go into the encounter. It doesn't do it all the time, but it still does it enough to the point where it is telling the player what needs to be done, so I don't get the complaints for Final Fantasy VIII tutorial when it tells you optionally the controls and everything, it tells you mandatory stuff, and it will occasionally remind you of certain aspects of judgment mechanics. It's the fact that judgment mechanic is a lot to take in, on top of the fact that, once again, judgment mechanic doesn't mesh well with every aspect of the video game, but the tutorial itself I don't see as an issue. Final Fantasy IV, however, is in a different case, where since that was the start of the ATB system, that is something the game really should have tutorialized a player how to properly use, especially since the first boss in the game, the Mist Dragon, requires the player to wait until the dragon goes from its mist form back to its dragon form. And it's one of those things where this is a new concept for players and everything, so you should tutorialize the player. Now, there is a tutorial in the game, with there being a special room of characters in the first town of Baron that actually teach the player certain mechanics, but it's also a very optional room the player could just not go into Baron when the first thing the game tells you is head over to the freaking village of summoners immediately. So they could not just go into there. It's even more explorative, more inquisitive, more going, let me go to this town and see what they got. But one of the things where FF4, ironically, because of its new gameplay style, needed a tutorial more for that aspect to explain certain bosses require you to just wait. Now, all these examples have been for single-player titles. The problem then becomes for multiplayer titles, where not only can the game change over time for a live service game, or the metas have been created by that point, so the tutorial that's given is completely outdated. With my go-to one will be for Dead by Daylight. The tutorial in it teaches you the basics of Dead by Daylight, but it was more so the basics of Dead by Daylight in its earlier years, and not to account all the changes and updates the game has made over time. So many different freaking changes, and they never really updated the tutorial in order to take that into account. So someone solely going based on the tutorial for it will basically have a bunch of problems because of it, because it's explained enough. Or then there's just meta and strats, such as, hey, if you're gonna be a killer, pick up a survivor while you're facing a wall so they can't flashlight blind you, and stuff like that. So there's stuff that tricks that the player base already know and figured out, but that's not something developers really thought about, so of course tutorial won't really reflect that. Tutorial's not going to tell you kind of thing of, hey, go over here and then turn your face away, because developers probably definitely didn't think about stuff like that when it came to develop the game and strategies. So the tutorial is completely outdated compared to everything that's going on in the game at the time. And if that's what people excuse, that's why you watch online videos. But here's the thing. The tutorial of a game has people teach the player how to play the game. It's the developer's job to do that. And yes, online videos can teach you practically anything in the game, but it's not the responsibility of the player base or the player to seek information outside the game or anything else. Like, an instruction manual for a game is one thing that comes with the game, but having to go look up some online video as well as just trying to learn how to play the game is still the developer screwing up, even if in this case, it's the developers can anticipate how their own game would change down the line many years later. Last thing I'll mention is fighting games. How several of them will use stuff such as combo challenges, teach a player combos, and stuff like that, where they think they're helping, but one of the most important things about a fighting game is adapting to a scenario. So teaching a player just a long string of combo that, sure, you tell them a combo, but the situation we can never apply it, and that's to more specifically have to adapt to the scenario what's going on. So just teach them a big combo system doesn't exactly really help them in the long run or at all in actual fight, since, you know, the opportunity to do it may not even ever come, or the fact that every combo challenge generally has a combo thing, pull this off against a static opponent that's not moving, which of course in an actual match, that's not really gonna happen, on top of the fact of, hey, you could make an opening, but it's not the opening for a specific combo they taught you, so the information they taught you is effectively worthless. I still want to talk about tutorials because there's many ways to do it. I know many people focus on the more earlier video game styles, like Mario 1, where it's like, oh, here's a straight path. Here's the thing you gotta jump over. Here's the thing you gotta jump over now, there's a pit. teaching you about stuff you gotta jump over, and then dangers of pitfalls, try to do it more naturally without words. Or it could go more like just Zelda and how they keep giving Link a companion character who is there to help explain stuff to the player, essentially being the developer's mouthpiece, but that have raging executions. There's people like Manda, who's still a mouthpiece for tutorial, but people complain about Navi, who fills the exact same role. People like Tattle, stuff like that, where characters have a mouthpiece that, throughout execution, some may not like it, like I mentioned, Roll Mega Man Legends, or Fee and Skyward Sword, but people like Midna, stuff like that. So there's many different ways to tutorial as a player, but they are very important to have. Like I said, every video game out there is someone's first video game, so they don't know the basic gist. I know people hate it when a game teaches them the basic functions of the controller specifically. Like, it goes that far. But there's someone out there who may not even know how to even do that kind of thing, you know? That's why it's very important that consoles come with packing titles and stuff like that, teach them how to use a controller. But that's a different topic because the manufacturer is screwing people over, kind of thing. So go out there, play games with tutorials you can do, skip, or tutorials you enjoy that may be the best part of the game, who knows? Some people are liking some of the earlier parts of the game, and then nothing else. We're going to step on the topic of tutorials. Alrighty then, good day.